Our stitching continues normally now, all the way to the very end until we get to our other two back stitches. We'll do that at the end. However, I'm only going to stitch to this point. So the right hand needle into the next available empty hole. Let go with the index finger and thumb. Our two objects are visible on the back. Our left hand needle comes in between those two objects, creates a cross with the existing needle, and we pull through 8 to 10 inches or so, certainly at the very least until that tail comes out. Index finger comes over the top, we pull towards us. Left hand needle now turns towards the back of the leather and goes in to the empty side of that hole. Push it in nice and deeply, let go with the index finger and thumb, pull the thread to make sure we haven't caught it, cast. Take out all the slack, don't need any loops, no back stitches, come back nice and close, and tension, and relax. And we continue on like that until we've completed our stitching. All the slack, come back, and tension. One more. One more, talking through it. Right hand needle, next available empty hole. Push through nice and deeply. Left hand needle, in the gap between the two objects, create that cross, pull through. Index finger over, pull the thread out the way, put the needle back into the empty side of the hole and push. Let go with the index finger and thumb, line the thread up, pull the thread, cast. Take out all the slack, tension, and we can see our stitch is beginning to appear. We're at our first mark. We're going to change how we stitch. The first change we're going to make is to left-handed. This is representative for any left-handers out there. It's also representative if you are stitching an item both sides differently. So you're having to stitch one side left-handed, one side right-handed. What do we do? Because if we apply the same stitch, it won't work. We'll have a different stitch on one side to what we have on the other. So, left hand needle, first available empty hole. Here, now on the right hand side, we can still see our two objects. The formula doesn't change. Our right hand needle goes between those two objects and creates that cross. We pull through 8 to 10 inches or so. We take our index finger, hook that thread, pull towards us because we are stitching towards us. We now take our left hand needle and point it towards the back of the leather, and we go into the empty side of that hole. Let go with the index finger, line the thread up with the needle and pull to make sure we haven't pierced. The question is here, do we need to cast? Because we've swapped over, we look at our holes. Here we can see we are coming from the top of the previous hole, and we want this loop, which is going to form our stitch, to go into the bottom of the next hole. The loop is already on the bottom. You do not need to cast. We take out all the slack, we come back nice and intimate, we tension, and we have exactly the same looking stitch. Nothing changes. We go back with the left hand needle, so now we're stitching left-handed, left hand priority. Next available empty hole with a left needle. We can see our two objects, and we can also see the previous stitch that we did left-handed looks exactly the same as the last stitch we did right-handed. So we have our two objects. Our right hand needle is still the jam in our sandwich, goes between those two objects. We create that cross. We pull through 8 to 10 inches. Index finger comes over the top, hooks that thread, pulls towards us because we are stitching towards us. Our left hand needle points towards the back of the leather. We pop it into the empty side of that hole. We push it in nice and deeply. Let go with the index finger, line the thread up in line with the needle, pull to make sure we haven't pierced. We know we're going from the top of the previous hole to the bottom of the next hole. The loop is already low, we do not need to cast. Take out all the slack, come back, nice and intimate, tension visually. It's the same stitch. Nothing changes. Visually, nothing changes. So exactly the same again. Left hand needle, create that cross, come back in, pop it into the empty side of the hole, pull, no cast, complete the stitch, tension, it's the same stitch. Every single time. We've gone from right-handed to left-handed. No cast. Tension. Talk you through it one more time. Left hand needle, next available empty hole. Right hand needle, into the gap, create that cross. Pull through, pull the thread towards you because you're stitching towards you. Back into that hole. Let go with the index finger. Pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced. Take out all the slack. Come in nice and intimate, and tension. One more. Left hand needle into the empty hole. Right hand needle into the gap. Pull through. Hook with the index finger. Back into the empty side of the hole. Let go with the index finger. Line the thread up and pull. No cast. There we have 2 inches of stitching. These 2 inches look the same. But this is right-handed. This is left-handed. What happens when we get to the end of an item and we can't turn it? Let's say for argument's sake we've got to stitch vertically down. Let's have a look at that. Now if this style of stitching can be avoided, try and do so. Always try and stitch comfortably. But if you are backed into a corner and you have to stitch a different way, this can change how your stitching looks, especially if you're using a stitching style that doesn't adapt. This stitching style does, because it tells you all the information you need to know is right in front of you. So we're going to start off stitching right-handed, right-hand priority. Now the one thing that you're going to notice straight away is gravity is going to pull this thread in the way of the holes. So it's management. So popping it out the way isn't going to hurt. Right hand needle, next available empty hole. We are stitching vertically down. So we're going to push that through. Now I've got this quite far out the clam to make it more visible for you. If I push it right in, this is going to get in the way. So the leather's going to wobble. My advice to you is push it in closer. But for visuals, this is what I've got. So right hand needle goes in first. Right-handed, right hand priority. So looking at the back, we've still got our 2 objects, our thread and our needle. Our thread is hanging over our needle, so again, we can pop that out the way. Our left-hand needle now wants to point to the top of the leather. It still goes between the 2 objects. That doesn't change. We pull through. Index finger comes around, hooks that thread and pulls down. It pulls down because we're stitching down. Our left hand needle now points to the back of the leather and goes into the empty side of the hole. We push through nice and deeply. We pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced it. The question is, do we need to cast? So it's more of a case of front and back now. Our stitch wants to go from the bottom or the back of the hole to the top or the front of the hole. This loop is at the back. It wants to be at the front or on top. So again, we need to cast. Putting this loop on top. If we have the loop hanging here, and this is where it gets confusing, that loop is sitting low. If we cast up and away from us, that loop is actually sitting high. And that's what we're after achieving. Albeit all of our threads are over this side. and at which point we continue. And as we take out all of our slack, come back to tension, we can see our stitch, albeit in a different direction, looks exactly the same. Right hand needle, next available empty hole, pop it through, just support the leather because the clam hasn't quite got it. We have our two objects out of the back, we can just get that out of the way for a moment. Our left hand needle points towards the top of the leather, in that gap create that cross and pull through. Index finger now comes around the leather, hooks, pulls down because we're stitching down, left hand needle points towards the back of the leather, back into the hole. Push it in nice and deeply, let go with the index finger, get that thread out of the way. Pull that thread in line with the needle so we make sure we haven't pierced, and cast. This looks like we're putting the loop over here, but in truth the way that that is sitting is that's actually sitting above now. So we want that loop high. It is high, albeit it's sitting on the wrong side of the needle. Gravity is being managed by us. Pull that out, take out all the slack, get that hook out of the way, and our stitch begins to appear. Come back in and tension. We have the same stitch appearing. We've had to change our stitching position because of the item that we're stitching, but our stitching style is helping us maintain a consistent stitch in any angle, and the information that you need is all there. Exactly the same again. Right hand needle, next available empty hole. Push it through nice and deeply. Left hand needle into the gap between the two objects, create that cross. Pull through. Index finger over the top, pull the thread down because we are stitching down. Left hand needle into the empty side of the hole, push it in nice and deeply, pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced, and cast. Unhook that, take out all the slack, come back and tension. And we can see on the front and the back our stitching remains consistent. Right hand needle, left hand needle, cast, take out the slack, tension. It's a little easier because now it's getting lower in the clam. Back through, pull, cast, slack, tension. I can still see the top of the leather, so I can still govern the tension nice and easily. Pull that out of the way. Pull and cast. Two more holes, let's talk through it again. Right hand needle, next available empty hole. Left hand needle goes in the gap. Clam's getting in the way a little bit now. Left hand needle back through the empty side of the hole. Right hand pulls the thread in line with the needle and cast. Let's raise that up a smoosh. Right hand needle, next available empty hole. Left hand needle between the two objects, still the jam in our sandwich, nothing changes. Pull through, index finger comes over, pulls the thread down because we're stitching down, back into the empty side of that hole. Push the needle in nice and deeply, get rid of that because visually it's getting in the way. Pull the thread to make sure we haven't pierced and cast. Unhook it from the clam, take out all of our slack, come back and tension. Just spinning it round. First inch right-handed right hand priority. Second inch, left-handed, left hand priority, same as the first. Third inch, stitching right-handed, right-handed priority, but vertically down, still the same, nothing changes. Let's mix it up. Now we are still stitching vertically, but we are going up, so new direction for us. Let's go right-handed. Next available empty hole, pop it in there, push it through. Again, a little bit out the clam, leather's wobbly. Here we have our two objects. This is the top of our leather, so now our needle points the other way towards the top of the leather. Still the jam in the sandwich. You can see how versatile this stitch is. It works in any angle. We create a cross, we pull through. Index finger comes over the top, hooks that thread, but now because we're stitching up, we pull up. Left hand needle points towards the back of the leather, goes through the correct side of the hole and pushes in nice and deeply. Pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced. It feels like we have. We keep pulling. It comes off the end. Question here now is, do we cast? Looking at this hole, so the top is here. We want to go from the bottom of this hole to the top of the next. We want this loop on top, so we do need to cast away. So we put the loop this side now. It stays this side so it looks visually a lot easier. We take out all the slack. We come in nice and close and we tension. And we can see, get rid of that, we can see that our stitch looks exactly the same on the front as all the others. On the back, it looks exactly the same as all the others. Nothing changes. Visually, it looks like it's all been stitched the same way. But this will give you so much more versatility when you get to complex builds that you can't keep in the clam the same way, or they're just too big. So right hand needle, next available empty hole. Left hand, we've got the two objects sticking out. Left hand needle points towards the top of the leather. Create that cross going between the two objects, jam in our sandwich, pull through. Index finger comes round, hooks that thread, pulls up because we're stitching up. Left hand needle comes back in to the empty side of that hole. Let go with the index finger and thumb. Pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced. And something unusual has happened here. So in doing the stitch, we have actually already cast. Because we're looking for it, we want to go from the bottom of the previous hole here to the top of this hole here. In doing what we've just done, we've already put that loop at the top. If we do that again, we will double cast. It will look a little different. So we don't need to cast because that loop has come out on top anyway. So we continue with that stitch. As we tension, we will notice that stitch looks exactly the same as the one before it. Right hand needle, next available empty hole. Pop it through. Left hand needle points towards the top of the leather. In the gap, jam in our sandwich, create that cross. Index finger comes up, pulls the thread up because we're stitching up. Try not to get the wrong side of this thread. Always try and keep the right side of the thread. Pop it back into that hole. Here, the loop is at the bottom. It wants to be at the top. We cast. So it's looking at it, checking every stitch. Because wouldn't it be horrible to stitch a beautiful row and have that one rogue one just sitting there, or a number, or different stitches because we've changed our stitching style. So let me just get to our next mark, as we've been doing. Again, that's come out at the top. We want it at the top, we'll leave it there, no cast required. These things happen when we're stitching awkwardly. Exactly the same again. It's come out on top, leave it on top. knowing what side it wants to be, introduces that level of consistency. Let's have one more and we'll get rid of the vertical. In the gap, point towards the top, create that cross, pull through, index finger up, pull it up because we're stitching up, pop it back in. It's already on top, don't need to cast. You tend to find when you're stitching comfortably, that's more consistent. That inconsistency is because I'm stitching with the seam away from me vertically, and I'm obviously putting the needle in a little bit differently, and that's causing the thread to come out on the correct side already, so we don't need to adjust it. Back to standard format. Let's give this a go. Let's turn it around. So now we're stitching away from us. We've got to swap our needles over to the opposite sides. Let's start stitching right-handed priority away from us. This is a representation of our back stitch, but we may have something where we're stitching something onto a bag. It could be a closure, it could be a tab, it could be a handle. We can't move the bag around. We've got to stitch comfortably, simple seam horizontally towards us, then down, then away from us, and then up. So we're kind of covering all of those angles, so you don't have to move everything round to achieve that goal. So right-handed, next available hole, right hand needle, stitching away from us. Left hand, we've got our two objects. They've changed. It was thread needle, it's now needle thread. Nonetheless, our left hand needle still goes between the two objects, always is the jam in our sandwich. We create that cross and we pull through 8 to 10 inches. Our index finger comes over, hooks that thread, but it pulls away from us because we are stitching away from us. Our left hand needle points towards the back of our leather, goes into the empty side of the hole, and push in nice and deeply. Do we cast? You tell me. We want to go from the top of the previous hole to the bottom of the next hole. We want the loop on the bottom. The loop is already on the bottom. No, we don't need to cast. Take out all the slack, come back, and tension. Our stitch looks the same. Right hand needle, next available empty hole, away from us. Left hand needle points towards the top of the leather, goes in the gap between the two objects, creates that cross, pulls through 8 to 10 inches. Our index finger comes over, hooks that thread and pulls away from us because we're stitching away from us. Left hand needle goes into the empty side of the hole between the two threads because again it is still the jam in our sandwich. Let go with the index finger, pull the thread to make sure we haven't pierced. We've established we're going from top to bottom. The loop is bottom, we don't need to cast. Take out all the slack, come back, tension. Our stitching is not changing. Our stitching style is being adapted because of how we're having to do everything, but actually our stitch looks exactly the same. This is giving you huge versatility. Now if you're stitching simple things like wallets and small leather goods like notebook covers, then you can turn it round in the clam all day long and you will have absolutely no issue whatsoever. But as soon as you become ambitious or you are restricted because of the item, then you have to adapt. This will help with that adaptation. So there's our last stitch. Right-handed priority, stitching away from us. Let's now go left-hand priority, stitching away from us. So our first needle is our left-hand needle. Right-hand needle now points towards the top, goes in the gap between the two objects, creates that cross, nothing changes. Index finger comes over the top, hooks that thread, pulls away from us because we're stitching away from us. Right hand needle points towards the empty side of the hole and goes back in. Let go with the index finger, line the thread up with the needle and pull to make sure we haven't pierced. We have to reassess whether we need to cast or not because we've changed our stitching style. Where are we coming from? Where are we going to? We are coming from the previous hole here, low, going to the next hole, high, so we need to cast. But in this instance, if we cast how we've been casting, we're undoing it. We need to cast towards us. We're stitching away from us, so we reversed it. So it needs to be high, but behind the needle. So the loop needs to be up here. So yes, we cast, but we cast towards us. If we cast away from us, we'll end up with a different looking stitch. We come in and we tension, and we can see we're achieving exactly the same stitch. Left hand needle, next available empty hole. Right hand needle, in the gap between the two objects, create that cross. Pull that through 8 to 10 inches. Index finger comes over, hooks it, but pulls away from us because we're stitching away from us. Right hand needle into the empty side of that hole, still between the two threads. Let go with the index finger, pull the thread in line with the needle to make sure we haven't pierced. We need to cast, but we know we're casting towards us, up and towards us. Take that needle out, take out all the slack, come back and tension. Our stitching remains the same. So we've turned it back round again. We're stitching towards us. I'm going to finish this inch right-handed towards me, left-handed towards me. You can just watch that. I shall speed it up a little bit just to get to the end so we can have a look at our back stitching. And there we go. That's our stitching all the way to the very last hole. Let's have a look at back stitching. Well, let's do the first one right-handed. So, right hand needle, right hand priority. Next hole on the right, pop the needle in. Left hand needle, again, formula is the same. In the gap, jam in our sandwich, create that cross, pull it through. Index finger comes over, pulls away from us because we're stitching away from us. Left hand needle goes in behind that thread. Pull that thread to make sure we haven't pierced. The question is, do we need to cast? We are going from the top of the previous hole, which is the first hole here, to the bottom of the next hole. We do not need to cast. The loop is already low. A little bit of beeswax because that's quite tough. There we go. And we take out most of the slack. Not all of it, enough to get a pencil through. We have a look at this first hole. We look at where the stitch is coming out, and the stitch is coming out for this loop here, and it's coming out below the existing stitch. What happened at the beginning often is reversed at the end. So we push that loop down, we put our needle under the existing stitch, and we pull the left hand thread. That sits those two stitches parallel. Looking at the back, we can see it's coming out high at the beginning. It wants to sit on top of that stitch. So we push that loop up out of the way, and we put our needle on top of the existing stitch, and we pull the right hand thread. That rides it up the needle, setting that stitch parallel to the first, and then we come back and we tension. Let's do this one left-handed. Left hand needle goes in first to the next hole. Pop it through deeply to the other side. Our right hand needle goes in the gap, still the jam in our sandwich. Pull that through. This is going to be tough, although we managed it. Index finger comes over the top, hooks that thread and pulls it away from us because we're stitching away from us. Right hand needle goes in behind that thread, back into the hole. There's 3 threads in here now. That's going to be tough. We've pierced that thread, so I pull that through at the same time. The question here is, do we cast? We are going from the bottom of the previous hole to the top of the next. So yes, that loop needs to be high. But again, because we're stitching left-handed and away from us, we cast up and towards us. That puts the loop behind the needle, this side, but high. At which point we take out most of the slack. Sticking with the left-hand needle, we have a look at where that wants to sit. It sits as it wants to sit before, high. So we push that loop up out the way. We put our needle on top of the existing stitch and we pull our right hand thread. That now sits parallel. Looking at our right hand, we can see again that's coming out low, so we push the loop down, we put our needle under the existing stitch and we pull the left hand thread. That sits those parallel, at which point we come in nice and intimately and we tension. That's our 2 back stitches finished. Snip your needles off, but don't snip your threads off. The lovely thing about this thread is we can apply heat to it, but we don't want to set it on fire. So I'm going to snip this nice and short, so there's only about 1 millimeter of thread poking out. We can then take a little bit of heat to this thread, but if we let the flame touch the thread, it acts like a fuse and it burns down, and then we get a big black globule of plastic all over our leather. We don't want to do that. So we never let the flame touch the thread. We hold the flame nice and close to the thread, and what we find then is the thread will naturally begin to shrink back, and that creates a little bit of a cap in the same colour, still white, but that cap will stop that thread going through that hole again, especially once we've tapped down. So if I just move that a smoosh there, and we hold the flame near to that thread until it absorbs the heat, warms up, and then begins to shrink back. The minute it reaches the leather, press. Don't rub, don't smear. That has created a cap in that hole. Combine that with tapping the hole down at the bottom, that thread can never go through that hole again. We do exactly the same on the back. We snip this nice and close, get our heat, hold it near. It will absorb the heat, shrink back, press. That's done. It is as simple as that. So that's our stitching done. All the different angles that we've applied to this stitch. Now, I've already tapped it down, just simply forgot to press record. But let's go to the overhead and have a look. So that is our piece of leather already tapped down. In tapping down, we've leveled off the leather on the front. We have evened up any inconsistencies in our tension. We've closed the holes up behind our stitches, and we brought the vibrancy of the thread back. All that remains now is a little bit of a rub to get rid of any excess beeswax, because this thread is waxed, and we can see there that we have a face stitch. Our face stitch is constant throughout our run, even though we started off right-handed, right-hand priority, left hand priority, vertical stitching down, vertical stitching up, stitching away from us right-handed, stitching towards us left-handed, no, stitching away from us left-handed, back to stitching towards us right-handed, and finish stitching away towards us left-handed, with a back stitch, one right-handed, one left-handed. Stitching looks the same. This is an incredibly versatile way of stitching. I'm not necessarily saying that you're going to get yourself into awkward positions, you may stitch for years and not have to deal with that. But if you do, if you encounter that, this will get you out of grief every single time, because the information that you need on when and where to cast is always in front of you. You just have to look for it. So if you're casting at the moment on your style of stitching, are you casting in the right place? Is it giving you a benefit, or is it actually working against you? So now you've seen this, have a look. It may be that your stitching style is absolutely fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But this is more towards the person that perhaps is looking to learn, and looking to learn a very versatile stitching style. If you have an effective stitching style, but it doesn't fit every criteria, when you try and stitch left-handed, it goes wrong. When you try and stitch vertically, it goes wrong. Give consideration to perhaps adjusting, changing styles. There is more than one way to skin a cat. Okay, no cats were harmed during the filming of this video, but that's to say there is certainly more than one way to achieve a goal consistently. This isn't the only way of doing it. This is my way of doing it. I like it, I teach it, and I and my students get a lot of success from it. But what if you don't want to follow my pre-pricking stitching style? What if you're not able to follow my pre-pricking stitching style? What do you do then? It's self-evident from what we've done so far that if we are stitching a single layer of leather, the stitching on the back is never going to look as good as the stitching on the front. The minute we put a second piece of leather into that equation, we have two face sides. We have pre-pricked both pieces, and that has crossed the holes. It's crossed the holes because of the issue the stitch has always given us. If we have our holes exactly the same front and back, our stitching will sit opposite. And the issue that we have is when the thread wants to go through those holes. Two objects cannot occupy the same space. Physics will not allow that. So one has to give way to the other. So we either put one on top or one below. That is just something that we have to do. If we look at our prime side, our right hand side, and we put that on top, that gives us our angle. But immediately we can see, because it's pushing the left hand side down, it flattens the stitch on the back. This is what happens when you stitch a single layer of leather. That's compounded by the back of that piece of leather perhaps not being as smooth as we would like, or the fibres being big and exploding out the holes, giving us a very inconsistent hole. So that works against us. But if we were to put two pieces of leather together, as we have done, we have a grain side on both sides. We have pricked from both sides. But in doing so, we've used the same set of holes for both pieces of leather. As we put one piece of leather to the back of the other piece of leather, that's immediately crossed our holes. What has that done for us? Well, our holes have always been like this. Our stitches have always been like this, and our stitches have always said, I can give you that if you cast, stitching right-handed, or I can give you that if you don't cast. One of those is going to happen. It's either going to be flat on the front and angled at the back, or you cast it's going to be flat on the back and angled on the front. This is because our holes are the same, and we're trying to get these two threads to occupy the same space. But if we were to change our holes and then our stitches change, they don't touch. They're separate. And this is what allows the stitch on the back to look like a face stitch, or become a face stitch, because we don't have this battle. We still prioritise our cast because we're still looking at the best possible stitch for our face, but nonetheless it gives us a very, very credible stitch. This is why I would say don't stitch a single layer of leather. If you do, when you look at the back, you are not looking at the best representation of your stitch. If you're making a belt and you're stitching around the circumference of a belt, if you don't line it, if you don't put anything on the back of it, your stitching on the back of the belt is not going to look great. But of the two jobs, the stitching and the lining is the shortest job. Throw a lining onto it, because your stitching on the back will immediately look better. It will look better because you have a grain side. The fibres are tighter, closer together. Even if you punch through from the same side, you will get a better quality stitch on the back. And that's what we're going to look at. Here, I have a piece of 2.5mm thick leather and a piece of 1.5mm thick leather glued together flesh side to flesh side. So I have a grain side on both sides, 5mm thick. Let's punch some holes in this, all from the same side, and then stitch it and see what we can do about making our stitching on the back look good. So here's my leather, two pieces glued together. I have the thin piece at the back, the thick piece at the front, and it's the thick piece I want to mark up. So I am going to get my marker, start short, stop short, and run that down. That's my line for my stitches. Again, one tooth over the end. It doesn't really matter which end I start from. This is just an example, but it's good habit, good practice. Give it a kiss. We can now pop that on and say we're happy with that and commit. Moving down along that line, placing our holes absolutely in line with that line, straddling it, so when we finish stitching it, because that's what you'll see about the other stitching, is there is no line visible, it's hidden. Now we're going to punch through. We're going to punch all the way through. Here, keeping the tool vertical is critical. If we let the tool lean away from us, the holes on the back will come out closer. If we lean the tool towards us, the holes on the back will come out further away. If we're inconsistent as we're going, the holes will be up and down all over the place. So we've got to keep that tool vertical. We're going to pop it on our leather, keep it vertical, and give it a couple of strikes. Let's level that up. And we're going to have a look at the back. We don't necessarily need to go through anywhere near as much as we have done. 2mm is probably more than enough, but exactly the same as we've done before. We are not pulling the iron out of our leather. That will damage the leather and potentially damage the iron. We're going to push the leather off the iron, and then the iron comes out so easily. And we work our way forward, doing exactly the same thing. Looking at 2mm, that's not exactly level, so we'll level it. I'm holding it left-handed, striking it right-handed, which is a little awkward for me, but it's good for the camera. So again, with the block, pop it on the leather, press, hear that pop where the leather comes off, the tool just comes out. This gives us holes all the same size. And we continue all the way to the very end. I'm going to hide what I'm doing so you can't see it. There we are, a couple of mil poking out the back. Pop our black block back on. Pop. And our last strike. If we need to overlap more teeth, we overlap more teeth. That's absolutely fine. Exactly the same again. Then, as we look at this, we can see all of our holes are the same size. We can do what we did before. Just give it a gentle rub, just to flatten our leather down. That looks lovely. But what does the back look like? That's what the back looks like. We can see a much finer set of holes, but nonetheless, the fibres are still pushing out. The fibres aren't pushing out anywhere near as much or are nowhere near as prominent, because now this is a grain side piece of leather. It doesn't need to be thick, but in making it grain side, the fibres are stronger, closer together, so we get a far better set of holes doing it like that than we would on just punching through a piece of leather through to the flesh side. So lining something is a really nice way of finishing the back, but we can make our stitching look good too. So let's set up in the clam and let's stitch this and see what it looks like and what we can do to make our back look a little better. I'm having a little bit of a nightmare today. I've just done all of this, lovely explanation, very eloquent, even did some in French, and forgot to press record. So I'm doing it again. So we have to imagine this is the beginning. You are going to get an indication that this is going to work because the evidence is behind us. We are stitching right hand priority. So our first needle that goes in, if we were stitching left hand priority, we'd turn our leather round. So we pop our needle in, nice and deep. At the back of our leather, we have our two objects. Our left hand needle points towards the top, goes between the two objects, we create that cross. Pull through, index finger over, and hooks that thread, pulls towards us because we're stitching towards us. Left hand needle in to the empty side of the hole, let go with the index finger, pull that thread in line with the needle. We know we're going from the bottom of the previous hole to the top of the next hole, so therefore we need to cast. The loop needs to be high. And we complete that stitch. We come in nice and close and we tension. Now the first thing that we're going to notice about tensioning this leather is we've got two pieces. Now when we stitched two pieces of leather together last time, we needed less tension. But these two pieces have been glued. They've been put under pressure, so they're actually firmer. So you will need more tension to seat this down. Now, what do we do about the back? We know that because of our holes, they're both the same front and back. We're asking this thread to pass itself. We're casting to prioritise the front. The likelihood is we're expecting the back to be flatter. However, the first thing that's happening is we've used a thicker piece of leather. If we go back to 3mm, we may consider using a much thinner thread to achieve this. But if we use the same thread on 3mm, this pass that goes on inside the leather is very short. Using a thicker leather gives far more space for this pass to take place. That is already working for us. What is also working for us is we have a grain side on the back. We've made the holes from the front, but the holes on the back have come out far smarter because we have that grain side. When we make our holes from the grain side and come out the flesh side, it looks ropey. It looks ropey because we can see the large fibres. Sticking another piece of leather over that, like this, has changed the dynamics dramatically because the fibres around the hole are much smaller, tighter and stronger. So that's immediately giving us a better hole. In addition to that, we can talk about this angle tension thing. Now, if you are achieving using the angle tension, fine, we'll leave that there. I'm not advising you use it because it does distort shoulder. If you're using bridle, no problem. But the principle of that technique is a very sound principle. And we can apply that principle here. And what we're after doing when we do that is seating certainly one thread lower in the hole than it otherwise would sit if we didn't. And we can achieve that not by lateral tension, we can get rid of that, but we can keep this one. We don't need to apply a lot of power, we just need to seat it to the bottom of that hole. It does not need force. If we don't apply force, we're not damaging the leather, we're not elongating the hole, but we are pulling that thread to the bottom of the hole in preparation for the next stitch. So if we go back to our stitching, we'll pop our right hand needle in Our left hand needle goes in the gap, creates that cross, pulls through, index finger hooks, pull towards us because we're stitching towards us. Our left hand needle goes back through the hole. We let go with the index finger, we pull. We cast. Cast is after the fact. We've done all of that work and we are casting to finish the stitch. Take out all the slack, come back and tension. That's done. Here, when we pull this down, we're doing that in preparation for the next stitch. So the tug is the first thing we do for the next stitch. Casting on the face side is the last thing we do for the last stitch. Pop that through there, left hand needle into the gap, create that cross, hook, back in, pull so we haven't pierced, cast, take out all the slack, come back, tension, tug, preparation for the next stitch. And we can see we are gaining a very credible stitch on the back of our leather, even though we've made all of our holes from the same side. Now this is a lovely technique, it's viable, it works, but there are limits. Those limits would be, if we wanted to stitch 2 layers of 3mm together, we may be on the cusp. But if we wanted to go any thicker than that, then the hole that we'd end up making on the front of our leather would be so big that our stitching may distort. We'd have less leather between each hole and would have a much bigger hole. And if we can see the hole even after we've tapped down because it's so big, then that can have an impact on our stitching. In addition to that, that becomes difficult because you drive your irons through 6mm of leather, you're fighting to get it out. If you're fighting to get it out, you can distort the leather or damage the tool. It's context. What are you trying to achieve and how are you trying to achieve it? If you start getting into multiple layers, then the most achievable way is to pre-prick all of your pieces separately. That probably is another video, but a really good way of achieving things like knife sheaths, where you probably have 4 or 5 layers of 3mm leather stitched together to protect the knife or carry the knife and then protect the blade with the welds. Trying to punch through 9 to 12mm of leather with a set of irons just is not viable. That's where you start getting people going to the drill press and drilling their holes, which, if that's your thing, that's your thing. But are you achieving your best goal? Are you producing your best work? I would suggest potentially not. But we can see here, just with that gentle tap down or tug of our thread, after tension, we're setting up for the next stitch. That'll do. I think you get the idea. So that's our piece of leather stitched. Let's tap it down, have a look and see what we think. So again, we've not bothered with any back stitches. We'll give that a rub with a cloth. Do it on both sides. This is the right hand side. This is our face side. We have a lovely looking stitch. We've stitched it all right-handed, right hand priority. This is the back of our stitch. And actually I've got a rogue one there, probably where I'm, that's where I stopped. So this is the point that I started the fresh video and I obviously didn't do the tug down. So that's not necessarily a bad example. I'm going to leave that in there, that if you don't tug down the next stitch in preparation, which this one hasn't been tugged down, it's sat high. But if we were to have tugged that down to the bottom of the hole, it would look better. All of these have been tugged down and they look lovely. So that's the point that I did early on, forgot to press record, started again, but obviously didn't do the tug down, like I didn't necessarily do it here. But if we ignore that and look at the stitching that we've just done on video, there's nothing wrong with that. That's the principle of this angled tension, broken down, looked at what we achieve from it, and realise we only need one part of that to achieve a credible stitch. Tugging the front doesn't do anything for us. Our cast does that for us. That tug down on the back achieves a credible stitch on the back. Folks, an updated version of the saddle stitch video. An updated version to accommodate the new tools and perhaps a more developed and more polished stitching style. If you are struggling with your stitching, you follow these principles, you will achieve. I promise you. Everybody that I've taught so far has achieved. I've had nobody turn around and say, well, I just can't do it. It takes a bit to get your head round. You have to appreciate you may have to unlearn some things to put this information in. But ultimately, you can see we can stitch in multiple directions. That means we can build more complex items without turning it round. We can go all the way through from one side and tug. We can use different irons to achieve a credible stitch. It's about helping you. If you find it useful, give us a thumbs up, give us a follow. Let us know what else you'd like to see on YouTube. More is coming. Certainly in the interim it's going to be stitching related, but it's about time that I started updating videos on here and sharing the love a little bit more. Folks, take care, enjoy, and I'll speak to you soon.